Greetings. Today we're going to talk about two of the most famous city-states of ancient Greece, Sparta and Athens. Spartan society was a society that was completely dominated by war. They started training young boys normally right after birth to be prepared for war. War was integrated throughout their society. There was a rumor that the Spartans refused to use bow and arrows in their armies because they felt like anybody who needed to attack from a distance was a coward. Once the boys were old enough for battle, they would live in barracks for 20 to 30 years until the age of 60 when they could retire. They weren't like the Athenians in the sense that they were looking to study science and philosophy and art. They were pretty much just concerned with war. So the needs that they had in their society were very minimal. They spent the bulk of their day either hunting or training and preparing for the next battle. As you can imagine, nobody really wanted to go to war with the Spartans. I mean, would you? It was said that the Spartans didn't even have walls to protect their city. They wanted to be invaded. Interestingly, the women also would train for battle as well. Even though they were responsible for running the household most of the time, they still did physical training and sometimes even competed against men in athletic events. Most of the day-to-day work, such as farming and gardening and building, was mostly done by the slaves. The Spartans did elect a king, but the king was mostly used as a leader in warfare. They had elected officials, but mostly their job was just to monitor the work of the slaves. At the end of the day, the Spartans were a warlike people and not much else. By contrast, in a pretty drastic contrast, the Athenians were much different. The young boys trained physical activity like the Spartans, but they didn't have to dedicate their entire life to war. As a matter of fact, they only had to serve in the army for up to 2 years, and after that, they only had to go back to the army in times of war. Boys were also expected to learn music and poetry. They also learned how to read, focusing on the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. If a family was very wealthy, they could hire private tutors for their children, where the boys could learn mathematical concepts, astronomy, geometry. However, we are talking mostly about the wealthier citizens. Most people in Athens weren't wealthy. They were mostly, much like the other societies we've studied, poor farmers. And much like the other societies we've studied, women for the most part had no actual rights of their own. They got no education, they had no say-so in who they could and couldn't marry, and most of the time they weren't allowed to own any property or certainly not have any political power. As you can imagine, it was only a matter of time before Sparta and Athens decided to go to war with each other. This became known as the Peloponnesian War. The war lasted for over 10 years, with neither side being able to gain an advantage. Finally, the Spartans were able to break through, conquer Athens, and then conquer almost all of the Greek Isles. Now, unfortunately, because of the Spartans' philosophy of warfare and just being very tyrannical, the city-states began to rebel, and this left them open to attacks from the outside, which is exactly what's going to happen, and we'll discuss that later.